universally regarded that we can go back and change the past. And there's an enormous body of evidence, everything from random event generators to having gerbils go on activity wheels, to people walking across streets, to people trying to regulate their own breathing or blood flow, all sorts of things demonstrating that our thoughts can affect things that apparently seem to have already occurred. And so that really throws up what time is, that it, instead of this forward-going arrow, that maybe it is one big smeared out now, or as many scientists now believe, that we're not changing the past, where actually the future is changing the present as it unfolds. So that gives us a very different dimension of time, and also suggests that we can go back, essentially. We're not really going back, we're just going to another state and change things. So Brian, tell everybody a bit about some of the ways that you think that working essentially and going back to the past can help to change things, and what your therapy can help.
Okay, well, let's just you backtrack a little bit and just talk about trauma, which leads to all sorts of problems later in life. Now, psychiatrists like to use the term trauma, but I think it's not a very helpful expression, because I think people think about something large, enormous, life-changing when they think about trauma, such as in war situations, rape, and goodness knows what else. But of course, it doesn't have to be like that. The trauma is determined by the sensitivity of the person. So any number of things can cause a trauma, if you like. In fact, I don't use the term in time-light therapy. Instead, I use a term called time-heavy experiences. In other words, that is the beginning of time when something happens to you that causes some schism between you and the world, if you like. So what happened to me was that I was abused as a child for many years. It was an emotional abuse, not physical abuse. And as an adult, I became chronically depressed, but never made a connection between what happened to me as a child and what was happening to me as an adult. But it made life very difficult for me. And Lynn was very, very instrumental in helping me understand what had happened to me, which I got intellectually, but it didn't really change fundamentally how I was feeling and what was happening to me. And it was ruining my life. And so I one day had a number of revelations about what had happened. And at its heart was this understanding that time itself was these things that happened to me when I was 4 and 5 were still happening to me now. They were alive in me right now. There was no difference at all. The time hadn't eased anything. Time was not a great healer at all. And when I started to discover this stuff, I began researching my discoveries to discover that, in fact, there had been some research into this, not much, but there had been some. And one university had come to what they called 17 adverse childhood experiences, which isn't a very sexy title, but it ranged from anything from your parents not being at home when you got back from school, through to your parents shouting at you, through to seeing your mother being hit by your father, right the way through to sexual intercourse with an adult, with your parent. And the scientists discovered that anybody who had 4 or more of these adverse childhood experiences, as they called them, were 4 times more likely to suffer a heart attack or chronic disease than someone who suffered fewer than 4. And that made me realize I was definitely on the right track, that in fact no one's been able to explain this, even to this day, how this could possibly happen. How could it be, for example, that someone shouting at you when you were 5 increases, quadruples your chance of cancer when you're 55? No one can explain this. But if you see that, well, it's the energy of the time, of the energy of that experience living through you now, then it makes sense. If you get that the past and time itself is energetic, yeah, then it starts to make sense. And so that is at the core of the time light therapy.
Absolutely. And then in tandem, I started experimenting a number of years back with intention and time travel. I realized if there's this vast body of evidence showing that retro intention works in the laboratory, then let's try doing it in real life. So I began working with my students and having them go back to the past. Now, I didn't change what happened. I didn't ask them, go back and imagine, instead of that teacher yelling at you and traumatizing you and making you stand up and hang your head because you didn't understand math at the age of 7. You don't change that and say, oh, the teacher's praising you and giving you an A. What I do is work with them to take back their power, because that's really at the core of what happens when we have a trauma of any sort, a time-heavy experience, we prefer to use, as Brian uses it, rather than trauma. But whenever something that maybe hasn't been properly understood or completely understood, something that leaves its mark on you, I find it's a case of losing your power. So some of the techniques that I work on with people is to help them take back their power. And that can be one of those situations, like a teacher or parent yelling at you or worse, or it can even be an illness. And we find that there is an extraordinary change. For instance, I'll give you a really wonderful example. A few years back in a workshop, I had people go through and do some retro intentions. And one of the women in the group, let's call her Roz, was she'd had a traumatic situation around her teens, and it resulted in her having a really bad infection. And this infection was so bad, it left her permanently with vitiligo, where you start losing pigment and you have these big white patches. So we had her go back to the time, to that seed moment, as we call it, where things could have gone in two directions. It's kind of a crossroads, maybe the beginning of our early cracks in a relationship where you're starting to argue, or the very beginning of the disease where it could be resolved or it could get worse. Anything like that. Have her go back to that seed moment. And I had her do some processes that are retro intention. And I swear to you, and Brian was there, he saw it too. She stood up and said afterward, my skin is starting to repigment. Now, we were flabbergasted by this. We'd never heard of this before, but in subsequent work with students, I found people being able to heal all sorts of things. Because as Brian says, that time, it's like it happened right now. It's still there, it's living in you. And what we are doing, of course, is changing energy. Because you have to remember everything, even as Nature magazine recently wrote, everything is mental, everything is energy. You are energy, time is energy, everything is energy, and your thoughts are energy. And because of all of that, you can essentially take back your power. And that's the kind of work that Brian and I have started doing in our workshops and retreats, healing your past. And of course, we've got an upcoming one we'll tell you about shortly at Broughton Hall in Yorkshire, an amazing stately home that we decided is the perfect blend of history and spirit for us to run our retreats. We'll be running it September 5th through 9th. I'll tell you more in a minute. So Brian, tell them also a bit more about some of the therapies that you think are really helpful in getting over this time heaviness.
Sure. Well, look, first thing to say is, look, this is not an exercise in amnesia. You still remember what's happened to you. That doesn't go away. But the point is, it doesn't control you anymore. As Lynn says, you disempower it. You take the fangs out of the experience, if you like, and it has no hold over you. And there are a number of clues and signs that the past is enveloping you, and it envelops all of us to some extent. But if it's become critical, you'll know, because there'll be, for example, you'll see patterns in your life. So you're always making similar mistakes when it comes to money or relationships, jobs, whatever it might be. That's one thing. Another thing is also in some of the common mental problems, as they call them, such as depression, which I had, anxiety, addictions, so forth and so on. That's another sign, and that's obviously a big sign. But there's something even more important than any of those, and that is where you've got to the point where you don't have any joy in life anymore. Despite all the terrible things that we're reading about and see every day, whether it's Ukraine or the economy tanking or energy prices rising or whatever it might be, life is still a wonderful gift, and we should still feel that buzz of life. The simple things in life, whether it's looking at a flower or enjoying seeing a child play, whatever it might be. It's the simple things in life. It's not having loads of money in the bank. It's not having a big house, because those are the things of the world. We're talking about here the things of the soul. And that's the point, that we are spiritual beings. And and I suppose the human tragedy and ultimately the human triumph is that we are timeless people caught in time. And it's overcoming that time that is the great skill, it's the great challenge of being alive. And we have to go through that process in order to come through the other side. And yes, we have a number of exercises that help you do that. We've done them in workshops in the past. The retro intention is a great one. We have loads of other things that we do to help you through that. And as I say, whatever your problem is, whether it's anxiety or depression, with Timeline, what we look to do is change your relationship with time, not with the problem. And that's the sort of work we're doing all the time, and with some success.
Absolutely success. And here's another dimension to it as well. As you know, I do Power of Eight groups. I'm very interested in group intention. And so I've applied small group intention to retro intention too. And we've found extraordinary things. First of all, group intention works on so many levels. It works because of intention itself. It works because groups provide what psychologists call collective effervescence. It just brings everybody's energy up. It works because of altruism. You're intending most of the time for someone else. And it works primarily because you enter a state of oneness. It's the only time in your life, really, unless you are a yogi or you've had an extraordinary mystical experience, a peak experience, as Abraham Maslow used to call it. It's about the only time in your life where you actually viscerally feel what it's like to be in the field. You are always in the field. We're all a part of the field, but you don't really experience life that way. And suddenly entering that state of oneness is hugely transformational. But when you have a group also working on retro intention to heal something that's happened to you in your past, it is extraordinarily powerful. By the same token, one of the other things we do in our workshop is also propel you via time travel intention into the future. And once again, it's usually far more effective and powerful for other people to intend and imagine your future than it is for you, because they are free of all of the limitations and self-sabotage that usually characterize people doing their own imagining and their own future work themselves. So that's part of our Healing the Past work too, is moving you forward into a totally new direction. And Brian, you talked about patterns, and I think that is such an interesting thing, that we are breaking in these retreats.
Absolutely. I mean, you see great breakthroughs in as much as people suddenly change their lives dramatically. They find the job they want, they find the relationship they want. We find that relationships heal, mothers and daughters reconcile. All sorts of things happen all the time. Little mini miracles that they didn't think were at all possible. This couldn't happen, and yet they start to happen. And it is a remarkable thing and very rewarding thing to see, isn't it? It really does make our hearts sing that so many people are really making breakthroughs in their lives by understanding that the hold that time has over them. And it's not business as usual, and that's the great thing. That's what we try and teach you. And I went through it myself and know very much what a hold it has over us all. And it's we have to get through this. And because I have been through this, we've done it now with a psychiatric clinic in Germany as well. We have some case studies and some case histories to demonstrate how this is working. And if I may say so myself, I think it really is radical. I think it's something that really is a whole new way of looking at the human psyche that is innovative, that really, really helps. Because, I've done quite a study of psychiatry in its 100 years of history. They admit that after all that time, they still don't actually know what depression is and what causes it. They cannot figure this stuff out. And so, they're spinning around in circles. And there are things they do which modify behavior. But, I contest that really we want a revolution in behavior. And you can only have that with a revolution with yourself and your relationship with yourself.
Absolutely. And I think what's so great about this work is people are unconscious. As Brian said, they're destined to repeat their patterns over and over again. They keep picking Mr. Wrong. They keep choosing jobs that belittle them or bosses who bully them. They keep choosing the wrong place to live, or they're constantly not having enough money because they overspend. All of these things are unconscious patterns that people keep repeating because of something in their past. And that's what we aim to do all the time, is to help you identify and break these patterns. And it's amazing how quickly you can, using some of the techniques that we teach. And I also see that it doesn't have to just be something like health or depression. People break, as I say, bad money habits, that it came about because they had a profligate mother, or they never had enough money. So they've got a mirror situation, as you identified, Brian, where they're always doing the opposite of, say, what their parents did, or their parents were very abstemious. And so they're very, they always have a little bit too much to drink, or they're outright alcoholics. So all of those kinds of mirror patterns or just regular patterns are also something that can be fixed with time light and with retro intention.
Okay. Now, I don't know how many questions we're getting here, Lynn.
I think we've got quite a few.
Okay, because we promised that we'd talk for a little while. I know we started a bit late, but maybe I think it's always quite enriching to answer people's questions, so we can go deeper that way and answer their queries. So shall we do that now?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I've got
cool.
The questions right up here,
Okay,
Brian.
all right, cool.
So Lana has a great question.
Okay.
And by the way, everybody who's listening, please put your questions in the Q&A section, not in the chat. That's an easier place for us to read them.
Okay.
So put your questions over there. We're happy to answer some now. So Lana says, I've been diagnosed with a brain disorder called CADASIL, supposedly genetic and no cure. I was raised in a cult and experienced severe abuse through childhood. This disorder is affecting my mind and how I think. I'm meditating and really trying to work with my mind, but struggling. Any help, please? It's hard to think, and I've had seizures.
Oh, poor soul. do you want me to take some of them?
Yeah, the
Uh,
only thing I wanted just say,
mm,
putting our What Doctors Don't
mm,
Tell You hat on
right.
and some of our new science hat. First of all, things that are genetic. Genes are essentially like the silent keys of a piano. They require outside influences to be played. And those outside influences are all of the other things in our lives, the food we eat, the water we drink, the friends we have, the sum total of how we live our lives. That all affects a quartet of atoms that sit above the gene called the epigenome. And so genes are not always destiny. It sounds to me, Lana, also that you had a lot of negative influences in your environment that have possibly expressed those genes. But genes can get turned on and off. So I want to just preface this by just saying this is not a lifelong sentence. It doesn't have to be a lifelong sentence. So, Brian, why don't you start talking about
Sure. Well, Lana, first, my heart goes out to you. That's a terrible, terrible story. Um, this is it's hard to deal with a big case like this in such a short thing, but I'll give it a bit of a go. There are a number of fundamental things you have to understand. The first is that the experience itself is living through you right now. It's also created a self that owns the experience. Now, any attempt to work on this experience comes from the experience itself. Now, I know that sounds a bit crazy. There's an element of you that is happy. Deep inside, there's an element of you that feels happy, that is actually eternal and out of time. You may not think that, but really there is, and intuitively, I hope you may get that. So it's not that seeks happiness, because it is happy. So therefore, it's the unhappiness that seeks to be happy. And that unhappiness is those experiences that you went through as a child. Therefore, it's one and the same thing. The movement of the bad experience to modify it and to get rid of it comes from the bad experience. It doesn't come from a place of happiness. It comes from a place of great unhappiness. So the first thing you have to understand is the past is alive in you now. This is living through you right now. Secondly, it's not you. It's a self that is being created by the experience. Thirdly, any attempt to get rid of it will only at best create a modification of the problem, because the problem is trying to seek the modification. If you can really see those things, you will begin to progress and wake up. But I'm sorry, this is very skimming the surface here of a very profound thing, and time light is a very profound therapy. But I can only give you a few markers really of just in these few minutes. But if you can look at those things, I hope it might radically change your relationship to the experience. I hope that's helpful, but as I say, you need to sort of really come on board with time light a bit more to where we could go deeper. Okay.
Absolutely. And Lana, what we would do with you is help you regain your power. I mean, when people suffer severe abuse when they're children, the big problem is they're small people and they are up against very big people. They are absolutely powerless. And one of the keys we've had, and we have worked with a number of people who have suffered abuse, then abuse of every kind, is, as I say, going back and not changing what happened, changing your response to what happened.
Change your relationship to the problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. You change your relationship to the problem. And by the way, somebody wrote in the chat, Lana, our dear friend Joe Dispenza has workshops and he heals people from stage 4 cancer in 4 days. We heal people from stage 4 cancer in 10 minutes in many Power of 8 groups. Yeah. So I just wanted to let you know that, we've had thousands of
Yeah.
cases of people who do get healed with Power of Eight groups, just to emphasize the power of those groups.
Okay.
So now Lana also asked something else. How do
Okay.
you go back to infancy?
Well, in a way you don't, because the infancy is there with you now. All you have to do is realize it's alive and well or sick in you now. So you don't have to go back anywhere. It's there. It's just that you have to realize that it's not in the past. And so you have to engage with it, realizing that it's very present now. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it, what we do, as Brian says, is we defang it. The big problem is it lives through you like an unwanted guest. And what you need to do is not change it, change your relationship with it. And
Okay.
that's the real key. So we also have, do you think if we do this collectively, can we heal human history like the Holocaust to make it an example? Well, what we would like to, I think what we have to do is, once again, Anna, we're not changing what happened, we're changing people's response to what happened. So I think our key element with something like the Holocaust would be to heal the people who lived through the Holocaust, to change their relationship with this throbbing energy so it doesn't rob them of their future.
And I think that as you go through this work, it does go deeper as well, and you begin to understand why wars happen, why we do what we do to our fellow beings. Because I only touched the surface here, and there are 3 memory types that we have, for example, which I won't go into too much. But when you understand that, you'll begin to understand why we do what we do. And only when we can understand, well, why do wars happen, can we ever hope to live in a world where there aren't any. But you have to go through that and really come to a deep understanding of yourself, because in understanding yourself, you change the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so now several people are saying, is the information we're talking about available in our books, such as Retro Intention? The information about Brian's time light therapy is available in his book called The Untrue Story of You, published by Hay House. So you can get hold of that. And somebody from Germany said, how come it's not in German? Well, we are talking about that now, so it may well
translated it yet.
But we have a great deal of interest in that. Now, some of the people are asking about the workshop and retreat. So we will tell you shortly about the full course and what we're going to be doing in Broughton in September. People have asked if they can't travel there, will we be teaching this? Probably we'll be teaching this in the future. We find a residential class is one of the best ways to do this, but we're still investigating times to do this online.
I think there are degrees of magnification, really. We do these live things very rarely, and certainly we've done it rarely because of COVID, but we do these things once or twice a year. Otherwise, we mainly do stuff online. But live workshop is very special. And you can't quite, it's not as, what we do is pretty powerful anyway, but the workshops are especially special.
Absolutely. It goes in, and it's once again that working in person with other people. That is one of the big secret sauces. People get very close. This becomes your intention family. We ran a retreat a few years ago in Tuscany, and one of the groups, we put people in groups from the very beginning, and one of the groups was made up of people from the Middle East, from Australia, from Sri Lanka. And believe it or not, that group kept in touch. We called them the Garibaldi group because we were naming groups after famous Italians because we were in Tuscany. That group stayed in touch, carried on staying in touch. And when the couple who were part of it from Sri Lanka got married, everybody in the group traveled to the wedding in Sri Lanka. So there's some extraordinary things that happen in the retreat. Lynn Montung Montag has asked, is this being recorded? Yes, it is. And she is interested in the retreat for her daughter and who's clearing her soul's journey. So this will be sent to your email so you can forward it to her and for everybody else, anyone else you think might be interested. Now, let's see. Yvette says, could you talk more about the type of intentions to hold when regaining your power after traveling to the past? Also, is it important to travel to the first instance of a pattern, time-heavy incident, or just to any strong memory? So, Brian, why don't you first say about the pattern, how important it is to get to any strong memory?
Yeah, I mean, there are two questions there. I mean, with Lynn's work, going to the seed moment is important. Mm-hmm. But with the patterns, it doesn't matter because the point is, as I say, you're not working on the patterns. It's enough to recognize the patterns are happening in your life. That's giving you a red flag. There's a problem here. Having established that, then you start saying, well, why does this happen? And then the timeline therapy can come into play. And as I say, what you're really doing is changing your relationship to time, which is the energy of that experience from the past, rather than the experience itself. So, and I think in a way that's a great thing, because it's time. It's like I sort of liken it to putting a coat on a stand and everyone looking at the coat, and you feel you can deal with that then in a way that if you're trying to work purely on yourself, it's very painful and difficult. My point is, no. The experience has created a self that owns the experience. That's of no use to us because that is only going to achieve a modification of the experience. What we need to do is have a revolution where we bypass that to the time itself and your relationship with it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and when you say that, when you're asking what type of intention to hold, well, it depends on what the past event is, but essentially it is speaking up for yourself. So if that teacher said, let's say a teacher screamed at you and said, you're so stupid in math, I'm listing all of the people and listing them as teachers have done in order of excellence. And you're right down there in the bottom on this big list right in the front of the room, and you are mortified and you're hanging your head in shame. So we would help you speak up to that teacher and say, no, miss, I might not understand this now, but I will do in a few years. So I'm not stupid in math. So you take back your power. And yes, if you can go to a first instance, but a lot of people have issues from the time they were a baby. And I worked with a woman called Annette, whose mother was 19 when she had her. And she was traumatized by having a baby so young herself, and her partner had wanted a boy. And so she was deeply depressed. And so Annette never felt loved. So when we did a retro intention with her, it was about essentially communicating to her mother, even as a baby, how much she needed her and how much love she needed. And it was amazing because right after we did that, Annette had never had a good relationship with her mother. She went to see her, and it was, as her mother described, like a miracle. They began opening up to each other. They began expressing love for each other, and they have a big communication channel open now they never had before. So that's how powerful this can be. But it is really about, as I say, taking back your power. So, Bri, here's Joy saying, my friend was raped as a young teen and has never recovered. Her mother denied her help and her body is deteriorating and she's getting weaker. She's been suffering for decades.
So the question is, what does she do?
The question is, what should she do?
Well, the answer is always the same, I'm afraid. That, we have to understand what is happening to your friend and the energy that's passing through her. from this terrible, terrible trauma. And she has to see that. See that the first thing to do is to see the processes. And when you start to see, things can start to change. But you need to have intelligent seeing. You have to understand what is happening. And the terrible way the legacy of this trauma carries on living through her now, shaping her life, and getting to the point of physical deterioration. And it's absolutely essential that she, well, does something for sure, but ideally, I mean, come to the workshop if you can, but if you can't, read the book, read The Untrue Story of You. Come to my website, look to Lynn, do something. Please do something and tell her to do that. Tell her she's not a victim, that in fact it's nothing to do with her, in the sense that her essential self is not that. Her essential self is outside of time. That's our, for want of a better term, is our soul, whatever you like, whatever term you wish to use. But that is her essential self. And that has been completely overshadowed by the past. So the timeless has been overshadowed by the past. So what we need to do is to use the incredible intelligence of the timeless to look at time, look at this past trauma and start working on it. But again, a glib, rather, superficial answer to a profound problem, but probably the best I can do right now. But, she has to do something and read the book, show her this recording, do something.
And the other thing perhaps we could suggest is for her to join a Power of Eight group. We find so many people, it's incredible when we start delving down, and the people who take our classes, people who take my Power of Eight masterclass, we have thousands of people who have very sad stories. Mm. And one thing that I find that is so helpful is creating a Power of Eight group, because there are several things. You have that buoyancy of other people, and a group of strangers intending for you is one of the most strengthening things I've ever seen. There's something about that experience of oneness. And of course, we've done brainwave studies on Power of Eight groups and found very quickly people enter into this state of oneness, which is very different from meditation. It is essentially a mystical state, and that can be the state of healing too. So that would be my first recommendation too, after reading Brian's book. So we've got an esoteric question.
Esoteric, okay.
From Jenny.
Okay.
Brian, do you think time could be more than one-dimensional?
Well, it doesn't exist. That's the first thing. And I mean, I don't like to get too metaphysical in these discussions, because we can. But time is not a dimension. Time is energetic, as I say. And it's been I think a bit of a red herring that people have seen it as a dimension. And I don't hold that it is. There is no such thing as time in the sense of an orderly process. As Lynn says in quantum physics, it's all if you wish, everything's a smeared out now, if you will. And certainly when we look at trauma, it's very present right now. So yeah, I'm probably not a very good esoteric answer to your esoteric question, but I don't hold that it's dimensional at all.
No, it's not dimensional, it's an energy. And as I said earlier, every quantum physicist worth his salt now says there's no such thing as time. There is no such thing as sequential time as we have created it.
Well, yeah, I know. Say there's no such thing as time the minute you stop it. Till you do, time is everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as I say, the ultimate ambition or purpose of life is for an eternal, timeless being to enter that state whilst living in time. That's the ultimate challenge.
Absolutely. Now, Fernanda has said, what about if you don't know the time of the event that triggered the condition or illness? Now, that's a good one. And lots of people, Fernanda, ask that. And because they don't know, they know that they were, they were shouted at many times as a child and belittled, but they don't know the first time. As long as you know a time, it's about, remember, it's patterns continue. And if you've had something in your life where you've had multiple cases of that, or you repeat that pattern in your own life all the time by yourself, by your own volition, then go to the first one you remember. And then we do the retro intention exercise. So that's what I usually tell people to do. Okay, now this woman has said, after third time, this Marina has said from Belgium that she had childhood trauma and she's had numerous tumors and cancer. Can it be reversed?
Yep, it can be. But I don't want to make light of this. I mean, I think in the face of diseases like cancer, I think we all have to be extremely humble and accept we don't always have the answers to everything. But having said that, yes, it is. But I think you have to understand the genesis, the beginning of the energy in order to make that transformation. But yes, I mean, it's been well studied. It's called spontaneous remission. And many cases of cancer have just gone away. And researchers have looked at it and tried to understand. And there have been multifarious reasons why these cancers have gone away. I think it was Bernie Siegel we used to work with years ago, who came up with a number of factors which he found cancer patients seemed to share. And one was that they had always denied themselves, put others first, that they had always put on hold the things they wanted to do with their lives, or maybe they didn't feel love or could express love. And that is typical for a trauma patient, by the way, is not to feel love or express love. That's very typical. But all these cases did resolve themselves. And so, yes, theoretically, they can be. But I don't really want to go, I don't want to make sort of promises here because it is much more profound than that.
Let me also say that if you look at the work of Kelly Turner, she is very interesting, and so is the work of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. They have done a study of spontaneous healing, and they see that there are common factors. It is usually when the person takes back control of their lives in some way. They leave the dead-end job. They leave the abusive husband. They bring back the joy in their lives and possibility. Also, Kelly Turner, who did a study of hundreds and hundreds of cancer patients who were given up as no-hopers, who reversed cancer in their lives, she found 9 common factors, only 2 of which had to do with anything physical. And that was changing their diet and taking herbs and supplements. Everybody else and everything else was all about spiritual changes. Some of the cancer doctors, the integrative specialists we know of in our work with What Doctors Don't Tell You, will ask people to go through emotional work and emotional healing, or they feel they're not going to get completely better. So if you believe your cancer came from abuse as a child, that could be very likely. And so working to heal that trauma may well heal your cancer. And I also have seen it with, I have seen thousands of healings with Power of 8 groups, many stage 4 cancer. And sometimes also, and this was one of Kelly Turner's thing, a spiritual community, a batch of former strangers who were got your back and are intending for you all the time to heal is extraordinarily strengthening and healing. So all of those things I would recommend. Okay, so
It's
let's
time
just
for a question more, maybe another question or so.
yeah, let's see. A few people, by the way, have asked, where do I set up a Power of 8 group? You can do so on my community page, lynnmctaggart.com. You can do so on my Facebook group page, Connecting and Healing Through the Power of 8, a group page where people just put up a little sign saying, hey, I'm in California's time zone. I'm in the Pacific time zone. Anybody else want to join a Power of 8 group with me? So there are many ways you can join my community and get all kinds of information about Power of 8 groups and how to set them up, anything like that. Okay, let's see. I think here. I resonate with what Brian said. Childhood experiences affect most adults without them knowing it. I've just graduated as a certified hypnotherapist with Marissa Peer, another good friend of ours. Using this therapy, we hypnotize them, regress people back to children's scenes to understand their presenting problem. We look at these scenes and compare them to how they are today and get them to see the link between those scenes. So we use a number of techniques to change the way they perceive these scenes. So the things that Brian and Lynn are doing will perfectly complement this work. The Power of 8 group seems to be an even faster way of doing things. Well, I think there are multiple ways of healing trauma, and that's what makes alternative medicine so powerful. It goes to the places that conventional medicine can't reach.
Yeah.
But maybe, Brian, you want to say a little bit more about some of the things that you do to help people heal when they've had childhood abuse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as Lynn says, there are many paths to the promised land, and what resonates with you is what is important. Timelight presents a number of unique ways of looking at it, but it's not the only way. As I say, fundamentally, what the work is about is changing the relationship to time itself, because the time is the energy. And in the book, I do about 21 different sorts of exercises, right from simple ones such as observing without naming, so that we begin to learn not to identify with something, but just to be able to observe it. And that's the very first exercise that we do. And there's a whole series of others, and at the heart of it is forgiveness itself, of course. And but most people seem to get it wrong about forgiveness. And what we teach is more about you forgiving yourself for carrying the burden. And we go do quite a profound exercise where we come to understand the other player in this, or players in this, and the role they played, and coming to realize their limitations. One of the releasing thoughts for me was that, my dad, who was abusive to me for about, 5 or 6 years, I had to realize that he, despite that failure as a father, actually had done the very best he could. And that was, very important for me to help me move on. And that was part of the forgiveness process. So that's the sort of some of the things that we do. But, at its heart is a philosophy. And you have to understand, or get to some extent, the philosophy, because that explains why you're doing what you're doing going forward. And, and the keys are, as I say, time itself is an energy, that energy creates a you that then owns the problem, that you will then seek to find some modification of the problem, when in fact, you need to put those to one side and see that process that's happening, and use something else about yourself, this timeless part of yourself, to do the healing.
Absolutely. And numerous people are writing about various conditions. So I wanted to say two things. Number one, with conditions, When we're ill with something, it's psycho, emotional, or physical, or all three. So part of trying to work out what's wrong with you, why you got your illness, is it's not always because of a trauma you had as a child. It might be because you are exposed to toxic chemicals. We just published a story about somebody who had multiple sclerosis developed after he got insecticide, heavy duty insecticide spray in his house. So it can be, multiple causes. So it's about reflecting on when it started and what was going on at the time.
Yeah.
And that is really important. But when you can identify that it had something to do with the past, or even going back to that seed moment when it began, one of the things that we do is examine what was happening at the time.
I mean, if you have a physical condition, I mean, the timeline talks about the three selves that we are. We're three selves. We are present time. And that's really where you got to do a lot of the detective work first if you have a chronic health problem, because there's every chance it's going to be there. Could be environmental, could be toxins, could be your diet. Whatever it might be, very possibly are going to be in present time. Present time is everything that's around us right now. That's present time. If it's not there, then it's going to be in the psychological past, as I say. We have three memories. The psychological past, the one we've been talking about today. Look through that. Look for trauma. Look for things that are causing this. If it's not that, you go to the third level, which is the timeless state. What is thwarting you? Why is the timeless state in you not expressing itself in the world? Why are you not loving as much as you could? Why are you not fulfilled as you should be? Why are you not taking your life and making a giant celebration of it? The answer is going to be in one of those three time selves. And so, you have to work through those to find the solution. But one thing's for sure, it's in one of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a final question about what about inherited and transgenerational trauma?
Oh God!
May not even be aware of.
Oh God! Okay, I mean that's another story completely.
Yeah.
I mean we go. Yes, of course, that goes deeper and deeper. I mean we've only dealt with your life and that, but yes, we see it all the time. Patterns pass through generations. There's loads of evidence about this. Really interesting. But yeah, they pass through generations. Yeah, and this is the point, though, isn't it? This is our responsibility today to say it ends with me, right? Yeah, all these problems that went through from the grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, through to me can end now. And I think that's really the real amazing thing, the astonishing responsibility we have, but it's such an invigorating one.
And it's possible, and that's some of the work we do too, which is to help you identify this pattern goes back further than you, and how to heal, and also how to forgive. As Brian said, usually with transgenerational stuff, it's a lot about forgiving. Whoever it was, maybe the perpetrators on your ancestors, but forgiveness is a really important element, as is understanding and finally taking back your power. So we only have a few minutes left, but we wanted to tell you a little bit about what's going on at Broughton Hall in September. So we're running Heal Your Past in Broughton on September 5th through 9th. And we chose it for a very specific reason. We went there for a conference, and I was delighted to hear that Brenda Dunn, who was part of the Princeton University Pear Research Project, she was fundamental to the project with Dr. Robert John, the late Dean of Engineering. So she was going to be there. So that's why we went up. But then we saw this amazing place. 3,000 acres, a stately home that was a runner-up to the site that was going to be the filming site of Downton Abbey. So this amazing historic house, all renovated to its historic splendor, but also 3,000 acres of outbuildings, a spiritual center, because the current owners are very spiritually minded. So it has a real mystical dimension. It has its own center with an extraordinary spa, pool, etc. It has a wonderful plant-based restaurant, and it has things like a labyrinth, a mini Stonehenge, a fire pit, all of this kind of wild swimming, and beautiful historic cottages. So when we went there, didn't we? We just looked at it and said, this is just a perfect place for our Heal Your Past retreat.
Right.
So that's how we chose it. And we decided, and what we tend to do with these retreats is it's about 16, 17 hours of teaching, but that's not all we're going to do.
Not in
one day. But that's not all we're going to do. We're going to give everybody some free time to explore many things, everything from guided tours through the woods to we have someone coming to show all of the original Pear REG equipment is now housed in Broughton and in an outbuilding in Broughton. So we have somebody showing people how it works and allowing them to interact with those amazing mind over matter machines. We're going to have yoga, a wonderful banquet inside Broughton Hall, fire pit ceremony, outdoor dinner. So we have so many things to make it an unforgettable experience. And all that, and hopefully we're going to heal your past.
Well, it's very serious, but that you could never have more fun, and that's what this is about, really. It's a combination of all these things, and it's very profound. It goes deep. It changes us too. It's a really, really special time to be together and to be with your tribe as well, and that's just as important as being with us. Yeah.
Absolutely. You will leave with a group of people who will become your intention family.
Mm.
So thank you all so much for listening.
Do the people know? I mean, they know where to go. Go to Lynn's site.
Yes, it'll be in the chat. But for people who are going to be listening to this as a recording, just go to lynnmctaggart.com. And if you go to events and click onto retreats, you'll get full information about it. Okay. So do have a look at it, and we really hope to see you join us next September.
Great. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for bearing with us and our Facebook problems. We're sorry about that. And have a great day. Be time light.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.